At 2:47 a.m., somewhere in the dark waters 90 nautical miles west of Cartagena, the USS Howard's radar feed flickered. Then silence. One moment, the screen showed a slow-moving freighter named Santa Leticia. The next, its transponder went black, vanishing from every known maritime tracking system. The bridge crew stared in disbelief. Ships don't just disappear at sea, not with this kind of precision. Sir, a voice broke through the static, we've lost contact with the freighter Santa Leticia. No distress beacon, just gone. The captain leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The vessel wasn't scheduled for any port nearby. Its route didn't match known trade lanes. And yet, its last heading pointed toward U.S. territorial waters. The Navy initiated Operation Neptune Veil, a low-visibility response designed to investigate suspicious maritime signals without alerting civilian channels. Minutes later, a MH-60R Seahawk lifted off the deck, slicing through the rain-soaked sky. In its cockpit, two pilots scanned the radar overlay, one whispering, "If this is another ghost ship, it's the fifth this quarter." The Seahawk found her, a faint thermal outline drifting east. The freighter's lights were dead, engines running low, its flag Panamanian but unregistered to any current manifest. On paper, Santa Leticia belonged to a shell company, Lagomar Shipping. The address was a concrete mailbox in Panama City. No personnel, no records, no taxes paid in 6 years. The vessel's fuel capacity couldn't have supported the last leg of its supposed route. Something didn't add up. When the Navy hailed the ship, no one responded. No movement on deck. Only the echo of waves. Protocol required a closer look, so the Seahawk searchlight swept the deck, revealing signs of recent activity: torn ropes, scattered plastic ties, a half-open hatch leading below. Boarding teams assembled under radio silence. They expected contraband, maybe narcotics. What they found was worse. Below deck, the air was heavy, stale. The smell of salt oil and fear mingled in the narrow passage. Flashlights cut through the dark and stopped. Rows of metal cages welded into the cargo bay, empty now but still locked. Scraps of cloth. Water bottles. Toothbrushes. Names scratched into steel with fingernails. The Navy medics froze. This wasn't a smuggling vessel. This was human transport. As the crew expanded the search, they discovered a sealed compartment behind a false bulkhead. Inside, huddled together, were the survivors, 17 women and 9 minors, dehydrated, terrified, but alive. The youngest couldn't have been more than 8. They spoke little English, only fragments of Spanish and Eastern European dialects. Some carried crude tags marked Transit Alpha 07. It was evidence the Naval Criminal Investigative Service would later catalog, but at that moment, it was something simpler, a signal of horror and hope colliding in one breath. The ship's captain was nowhere to be found. The logbooks were blank, navigation systems wiped clean. And yet, someone had left behind a single encrypted drive, still warm from recent use. When the FBI's Crimes Against Persons unit from Quantico received the initial report, they recognized the pattern. The same code fragments traced from previous cases in Libya and the South China Sea. It wasn't a random smuggling op. It was infrastructure, global, deliberate, and worth billions. The Santa Leticia was only a piece of the machine. If you're watching this now, understand, this story isn't just about a mission. It's about the unseen war fought every day across the world's trade routes. If you believe these stories must be told, subscribe to this channel. Every week, we uncover the truths hidden beneath official silence, and your support helps bring them to light. Because as the radar blinked back to life that night, the freighter's new course appeared unmistakably on screen, turning north, heading straight toward American shores. And when the radar came back online, the freighter had turned straight toward U.S. waters. The investigation into the Santa Leticia didn't begin in the ocean, it began in the paperwork. After the rescue, every scrap of data pulled from the ship was cross-referenced with global maritime databases. The trail led to Panama, then Liberia, and finally to the Seychelles. Each country hosted fragments of a corporate maze, hundreds of shell companies each owning one ship, one address, and no employees. On paper, the fleet didn't exist. Financial analysts at the U.S. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network noticed something strange. Payments for port fees and insurance premiums routed through the same handful of offshore trusts. The amounts were small enough to avoid attention but steady, as if someone were maintaining ghost vessels, keeping them alive just enough to move. The deeper they dug, the clearer the pattern became. Every ship had a twin on paper, every owner had a ghost in another country. Among the names that surfaced, one stood out: Orion Maritime Holdings Limited, registered in Nicosia, Cyprus. A company that owned nothing yet controlled ships across 4 oceans. It was an invisible thread linking legitimate trade with something far darker. Investigators mapped vessel trajectories, comparing declared cargo manifests against actual movements logged by radar. Ships under Orion's umbrella consistently drifted off their reported courses, lingering near transfer zones. Always at night, always silent. And yet, for every lead uncovered, another vanished. Records deleted, ownership transferred, registries scrubbed clean overnight. Whoever ran Orion had reach, and a system built for erasure. To dismantle it, they'd need someone who could see patterns across oceans. That someone was Supervisory Special Agent Catherine Reyes. Reyes worked out of Quantico, known among colleagues for spotting what others missed. Her office was a glowing constellation of monitors, ship routes, encrypted messages, weather overlays. When the Navy forwarded the Santa Leticia logs, she saw something peculiar. Between each recorded coordinate, there were time gaps, seconds missing from AIS transmissions. To most it looked like system error. But Reyes noticed the deletions lined up perfectly with known radar outage windows. Ships don't vanish, she said. Data does. Someone's deleting it mid-transmission. She fed the raw feed into a custom script comparing multiple data sources: US radar, satellite imaging, commercial trackers. The results stunned her. The missing packets weren't random. They were synchronized with radar blind spots from Navy destroyers, specifically those operating under classified patrol routes. In short, someone on the inside knew exactly when American surveillance went dark. Reyes took her findings to the Joint Interagency Group East, a task force uniting FBI, NCIS, and naval intelligence. The conclusion was chilling. If the traffickers could anticipate radar coverage, it meant an internal leak, a mole feeding sensitive timing data to the network. Within hours, the Navy's internal security branch, NAVINSEC, opened a quiet probe under a code name that would never appear in public records: Operation Echo Vein. Analysts combed through communication logs from Bahrain to Norfolk, looking for anomalies. That's when they intercepted fragments of encrypted traffic, short bursts routed through a compromised satellite relay, echoing U.S. Navy encryption headers. The pattern matched previous SIGINT intercepts from a year prior, ones dismissed as false positives. But this time, the timestamps aligned with the Santa Leticia's blackout. The implication was impossible to ignore. Someone with high-level clearance was manipulating fleet data, protecting the convoys from detection. If someone inside was feeding routes, an NCIS agent muttered, the traffickers weren't just lucky, they were protected. And as Reyes compiled her final report for internal review, one name began to surface, linked through encrypted communications, clearance logs, and ghost transfers of digital credentials. The name belonged to a decorated naval officer. The digital breadcrumbs led straight to Miami. Supervisory Special Agent Catherine Reyes, alongside NCIS analysts and the FBI's Organized Crime Section, shifted focus from satellite feeds to shipping manifests and port logs. The port of Miami, a hub for legitimate trade and international cargo, suddenly became a battlefield of paperwork. Every container, every seal number, every timestamp was scrutinized. The Joint Task Force knew that the smallest inconsistency could point to a much larger operation. Enter the undercover asset known only as Mariner. Years of experience moving among stevedores and port officials gave Mariner a unique perspective. He moved quietly through the shipping yards, scanning containers as though reading their secrets. Every container tells a story, he said. You just have to open the right one. It wasn't long before he did. Container 0421B had been logged as holding textiles, but inside were racks of surveillance equipment: GPS trackers, high-frequency transceivers, and falsified shipping tags. Whoever was running this network had eyes everywhere, tracking vessels and operations across multiple oceans. The discovery confirmed what Reyes had feared. The network wasn't just moving people, it was built for precision, invisibility, and control. While the physical leads in Miami unfolded, investigators traced the organizational backbone of the syndicate. One name emerged repeatedly across financial audits, offshore accounts, and prior DA files: Miguel Arriola. An ex-logistics consultant turned ghost operator, Arriola had never been directly involved with drugs or violence, but his signature appeared on documents authorizing shipments, transfers and payments across Zurich, Belize and Panama. He never touched drugs or victims, an agent noted. He just signed papers. Invisible profit. The timeline of Arriola's movements further raised alarms. Passport records revealed a trip to Bahrain the same week Navy radar detected unexplained vessel activity. It was the same window during which the Santa Letitia's transponder had vanished. The implication was clear. Arriola was more than a paper broker. He was a linchpin connecting the logistical infrastructure of the trafficking operation with real-time intelligence, and his reach spanned continents. To fully understand the network, the FBI Cyber Division was brought in. They discovered a series of encrypted communications, cleverly disguised as routine shipping notifications. One phrase kept recurring: Blue Horizon Manifest. Its origin traced to a Singapore port node, linking East Asia to the Caribbean and ultimately the United States. When the decryption cell finally cracked the code, every vessel in the syndicate's network lit up like a constellation. Routes, schedules, and even temporary storage locations became visible for the first time. The revelation left the team in no doubt about the scale of what they faced. This was no isolated smuggling ring. It was a sophisticated, multinational operation, coordinated with military precision, and capable of evading surveillance unless every piece of data was meticulously cross-checked. And the next scheduled route, now fully revealed, led straight into the Gulf of Mexico, directly into U.S. waters and into the crosshairs of a team ready to strike. With the Gulf of Mexico route identified, the task force shifted into high gear. Catherine Reyes fed the decrypted ship schedules into a predictive maritime routing model, a system designed to anticipate vessel movements based on historical data, weather patterns and port rotations. Layered atop that, an AI-assisted human correlation tool cross-referenced known operatives, financial transactions and communications chatter. The results were startling. For the first time, the network's hidden rhythm emerged. Patterns don't lie. People do, Reyes muttered, scrolling through the visualization of dozens of vessels, every blinking icon representing a piece of the puzzle. The model, labeled internally as Project Neptune/Drift, highlighted a likely rendezvous off the Yucatan Peninsula in just 48 hours. Every route converged like clockwork, indicating a transfer that could involve multiple ships, possibly hundreds of victims and unknown quantities of illicit cargo. Time was no longer a luxury. Every delay increased the risk of lives lost and allowed the network to scatter once more. The analysis, however, also revealed internal compromise. Every blind spot in radar coverage, every AIS gap, corresponded with predictable Navy patrol patterns. Cross-checking deployment logs with financial audits, investigators began focusing on one officer, Lieutenant Commander Jason Hall, a logistics officer with access to routing schedules and classified deployment plans. Hall's background suggested loyalty and competence, yet the data traced suspicious deviations directly through his credentials. When confronted, Hall's response was a mixture of fear and relief. "You think I sold out my country for money?" he asked, voice tight. "You have no idea what they threatened me with." He admitted to relaying limited information to protect his family overseas, but the truth was worse than anyone imagined. His cooperation provided the team with precise coordinates for the final shipment, confirming that the traffickers' next operation was imminent and that interception depended entirely on flawless coordination. Across multiple agencies, preparations accelerated. Joint Operations Command Norfolk scrambled assets. The USCGC Hamilton was redeployed to the predicted rendezvous zone, Navy destroyers adjusted patrol grids, and strike authorization, codenamed Echo 7, was formally approved. Every command center was synchronized. Every unit knew the stakes. One wrong move and a legal shipment could be struck by mistake. One right move and dozens of lives would be saved. If we're wrong, we'll hit a legal shipment. If we're right, we'll save lives, an officer noted in a briefing. Yet even as the pieces aligned, nature reminded them of its power. A storm began rolling in from the Caribbean, clouds swelling across the horizon, winds churning the Gulf's surface. The storm threatened visibility, shifted currents, and could delay or even scatter the traffickers. It was a race against both human adversaries and the elements. Every calculation, every decision, and every breath counted. The tension was palpable, Every node in the network seemed to anticipate the task force's movements. The team waited on the edge of execution, knowing that the next 48 hours would determine the outcome of months of investigation. The Gulf of Mexico was about to become the stage where the invisible threads of a billion-dollar criminal enterprise would either unravel or tighten beyond reach. The room at Joint Operations Command felt smaller than its size, as if the air itself tightened around the charts and screens. Commanders from the Navy, Coast Guard, and the FBI took their seats beneath a low bank of monitors showing satellite tracks, weather models and live ISR feeds. A NORAD relay kept the lines open to Allied assets. Encryption keys rotated on schedule. The first slide listed known variables and unknowns, vessel identities, AIS gaps, likely transfer windows, and a public relations risk that could not be ignored. Every second matters. Every bullet must mean restraint, the operations lead said, and the sentence landed with the weight of precedent and law. Officers checked their rules of engagement and nodded. They were about to step into a gray zone between rescue and combat, and every legal box had to be ticked before the first boot left the deck. The brief was surgical. Intelligence operators walked through signal timelines, highlighting where AIS signals had been deleted and where Navy radar had shown brief blind spots. Financial investigators explained how payments funneled through Belize, Zurich, and Shell registries in the Seychelles supported logistics and fuel caches. A psychological operations liaison, tasked with minimizing harm during an intervention, outlined potential civilian reactions and responsive communications. Counsel from Navy JAG emphasized proportionality and care for non-combatants. The lead from the FBI's Crisis Response Unit described contingency arrest plans and victim extraction protocols. The team discussed escalation ladders and fallback positions until every officer understood their role with surgical clarity. Then, on a single line of incoming intel, the traffickers changed course. New satellite coordinates indicated the convoy altering speed and heading, as if reacting to a gust of wind. The change was small but significant. It suggested the traffickers had access to updated patrol patterns and could reroute to a more vulnerable meeting point. The operation that had been carefully timed suddenly had to be adjusted. The room moved like a single organism. Plans were redrawn, overlays updated, and assets redistributed. The strike authorization remained, but the window had narrowed. The new plan would require tighter synchronization between air suppression, surface interdiction, and cyber denial. The strategy itself layered capabilities to beat coordination with secrecy. An E-18G Growler would establish an electronic umbrella, neutralizing enemy communications and jamming any external receivers that could warn the convoy. Above that, an MQ-9 ISR feed would provide continuous visual confirmation, cross-checked with satellite imagery. At sea, the USCGC Hamilton would execute the perimeter hold, preventing escape and ensuring environmental safety for survivors. A Navy SEAL DevGrid detachment stood ready to perform the boarding and breach operations, trained to move fast and precise. Meanwhile, the FBI's Covert Crisis Response Unit prepared arrest teams and victim care details, ready to shepherd survivors into protective custody. Cyber operators would isolate the traffickers' comms nodes, severing links to satellite relays and spoof GPS signals. The plan read like a military ballet: jam their eyes, remove their legs, and cut the head clean off. Each element had contingency plans. If the Growler's jamming proved insufficient, SEALs would move to a deniable tether, using stealthy approaches to reduce exposure. If weather closed in, the interception would shift laterally, compressing the operational area without increasing risk to survivors. If the traffickers employed decoys, the perimeter would widen while ISR feeds cross-validated probable targets. Arrest teams trained for non-lethal capture practiced restraint drills until restraint became reflex. Toward the end of the rehearsal, one pragmatic voice broke the cadence. Intelligence warned, civilians might still be aboard. The reminder rewired the room. Tactics meant to incapacitate now needed a filter for mercy. Every assault technique had to be measured against the obligation to preserve life. Morality threaded through every tactical decision. Before weapons were issued, an ethics brief framed the mission. Navy JAG reviewed whether the proposed actions complied with both domestic law and international conventions, and requested written justification for every measure that risked collateral harm. Medical officers outlined triage priorities, evacuation paths, and long-term care handoffs to federal victim services. Psychologists warned of secondary trauma for both survivors and operators, and proposed immediate stabilization protocols. The Geneva Convention and rescue protocols were read aloud where applicable, not as abstract law but as operational guides. "We're not soldiers tonight, we're lifelines," a medic said, and the room absorbed the line as an order of conduct as much as a moral anchor. Practical exercises followed the brief. Boarding teams rehearsed silent stacks, practiced non-lethal entry options, and drilled extraction flows for injured civilians. Communication discipline was strict. Code words and fail-safes ensured teams could abort or pivot without losing situational awareness. Cyber teams ran through a sequence to sever the traffickers' external comms and erase their ability to spoof GPS, while intelligence analysts prepared a rolling stream of confirmed targets derived from biometric matches and deconfliction checks. Every plan included built-in pauses to reassess civilian presence and to permit negotiated compliance where possible. The objective was legal interdiction and human recovery, not unilateral force. As midnight approached, the weather worsened. The Caribbean storm that had been brewing shifted north, raising seas and throwing a new variable into the equation. Planners recalculated drift models and reviewed fuel endurance of small boats. If the storm worsened, rescue operations would become rescue and medical prioritizations rather than arrests. The team accepted the added risk. Time, they knew, favored the traffickers. The convoy could disperse, slip into hidden coves, or split human cargo across multiple vessels. The storm, however, could also funnel movement into predictable channels, making interception possible if they rigidly executed the new plan. At 0200, after a final legal affirmation and an exchange of short, encrypted confirmations, the green light flashed. Neptune Veil was a go. Aircraft took positions, naval vessels adjusted speed, and cyber units engaged passive denial. The Growler lit up emission blanks while drones queued on vector. SEALs left the staging ship in ready positions. Medical teams stood by with evacuation pods and stabilization kits. The FBI readied victim processing workflows and witness protection contingencies. Command channels narrowed to essential traffic only. For a handful of hours, the complex machinery of interagency coordination would become a single nervous system reacting to the smallest twitch. Yet even the best plan is a hypothesis until proven. Uncertainty remained. Would the traffickers resist violently, surrender immediately, or scatter into a dozen anonymous vessels? Could the team isolate the convoy without tipping off civilians? And if the operation succeeded, could they secure evidence strong enough for prosecution across multiple jurisdictions? Those questions hovered, unanswered, as assets moved into position. The line between rescue and war had been drawn, and every participant understood the cost of crossing it. Night had turned the gulf into a black mirror, and up above the MQ-9 Reaper's feed painted a pale, relentless truth. Pixels translated into motion, a silhouette of the Santa Leticia moving with purposeful slowness, heat signatures glimmering like small islands within the dark. Analysts watched in shifts, voices low and precise as the drone's camera traced the freighter's deck. Infrared revealed figures moving near open hatches. One analyst swallowed, then read aloud the line no one wanted to hear. "They're loading them now. God, they're just kids." The ISR overlay stitched together satellite stills and live imagery, creating a single, undeniable picture. Below, the ship's hold yawned with shadowed shapes. Above, thin beams of moonlight reflected off metal that might be cages or makeshift partitions. Every frame was time-stamped, every movement logged, forming an evidentiary chain that would later underpin prosecution. For the moment, the task force simply breathed in unison and watched. Confirmation meant action. Misidentification meant catastrophe. The Reaper's feed became both recorder and witness, a neutral eye that refused to blink. Then the screen flickered. A faint haze blurred thermal signatures that had been steady for minutes. Operators frowned as the Reaper lost a portion of its linked telemetry. At first they suspected the storm, but diagnostics reported an irregularity, a deliberate interference pattern superimposed on the feed. The comms team labeled it internally as a localized denial event. Within seconds, the audio channel caught fragments of chatter that didn't belong to the freighter. Rapid, clipped transmissions routed through a distant relay. Command flagged the intercept as Neptune Delta for internal reference and pushed transcription to linguists. The message fragments suggested coordination with escort vessels, precise timing, and an urgency that matched the decrypted manifests. If the escorts were armed, the mission's calculus changed. The SEALs would no longer be stepping onto a passive cargo deck. They would face organized resistance. The Growler's pilots tightened their resolve and prepared electronic suppression envelopes, while surface units adjusted intercept vectors to account for a heavier threat profile. Every available sensor strained to maintain a stable picture. The Reaper regained partial telemetry, and analysts watched as two shapes detached from the freighter and moved off its beam. Small, fast, likely skiffs, they cut into the night like knives. The unexpected became obvious a minute later. On a secondary radar feed, two fast craft displayed signatures consistent with military-grade armament. The escorts were not coastal fishermen. They were hired security, trained, equipped and ready to engage. The task force updated the threat assessment. "They knew we were watching," Reyes said without ceremony. The realization landed like cold lead. Somebody on the other side of the operation had access to near real-time intelligence about U.S. surveillance windows. The mole had provided timetables, but now the traffickers were reacting faster than a mole's simple leak could explain. Countermeasures flickered into life. Cyber operators executed a layered denial sequence, attempting to isolate spoofed GPS inputs and sever compromised satellite relays. The Growler extended its jamming umbrella, seeking to blind remote receivers and fracture the traffickers' situational awareness. Yet even as electronic nets closed, another problem surfaced: GPS spoofing. The Convoy's reported coordinates jittered on commercial trackers, then snapped back in inconsistent patterns. The task force's forensic team confirmed it: a targeted spoofing campaign aimed at confusing civilian tracking while maintaining internal cohesion. Spoofing, combined with rapid course changes and armed escorts, suggested an adaptability that had been underestimated. On the surface, the USCGC Hamilton tightened its perimeter, engines grinding against building swells. Smaller interceptor boats readied to close from multiple vectors. Communications discipline hardened. Brevity codes replaced full sentences, and the number of open channels dropped to essentials. The cyber team continued to hunt the origin of the interference while linguists worked the intercepted chatter. A fragmentary phrase repeated in 3 different communications nodes, an older codename tied to known logistics channels. Analysts cross-referenced it with Ariola's ledger entries and found a matching ledger timestamp. The traffickers were coordinating through at least one secure node operating out of a commercial uplink in Southeast Asia. Then the diversion became clearer. A second vessel, the San Pedro, appeared on peripheral sensors, loitering 2 miles north of the convoy. At first it read as a decoy, then its transponder blanked and an onboard pulse matched the signature of a counter-jamming system. The San Pedro's presence constituted an operational vector meant to draw attention outward while the Real transfer occurred elsewhere. The complexity of the operation revealed a lesson hard learned. The syndicate anticipated detection and planned layered misdirection. Analysts worked frantically to untangle truth from noise. A replay of the Reaper footage, slowed and reanalyzed frame by frame, revealed how the traffickers masked small skiffs by keeping them within thermal clutter produced by fuel exhaust and weather bands. The cyber team found the spoofed GPS packets and traced their point of origin to a Singapore port node, confirming the earlier decryption trace. A link existed between the coded Blue Horizon manifest messages and the live command structure managing escorts and decoys. The network operated like a nervous system. If one node was cut, another compensated. Even as complication mounted, hard evidence arrived. The biometric algorithm matched partial fingerprints recovered from a discarded wet glove on the freighter's deck to prints in a database from previous trafficking rescues. That match transformed suspicion into legal certainty. The victims were not anonymous. Some had been rescued once before and trafficked again. The pattern of recapture showed brutal repeatability and profit-driven indifference to human life. A final human intelligence push came as dawn began to bruise the horizon. A CIA HUMINT tip, codenamed Echo Dawn in operational logs, reported a likely rendezvous adjustment favoring a shallower bay 30 miles east of the initial intercept point. SIGINT triangulation confirmed the tip. Multiple nodes converged on the new coordinates. The window for decisive action narrowed to minutes. In the operations center, voices fell silent. Keyholders checked confirmations twice. Biometric matches, drone imagery, human corroboration, and SIGINT triangulation all aligned into a single, urgent directive. The commander's hand hovered above the execution console. 4 months the team had assembled the proof, the plans, and the partnerships needed for this exact moment. Everything led to a single order. All channels opened. Execute, execute, execute. The Gulf churned beneath a slate-gray sky as the DevGru entry stack moved into position. The seals pressed against the freighter's hull, the deck slick with rain and spray. Coast Guard cutters held a rigid perimeter, engines humming a controlled warning to any approaching vessels. Flashbangs and breaching charges were primed, calculated for effect and minimal collateral. Stack moving. Doors hot. Breach, GO. The team leader called, and the first explosive shattered the cargo bay doors with concussive precision. Smoke and noise erupted, metal twisting under tactical force. Inside, figures scrambled, and in the chaos, the sound of a single gunshot echoed, a harsh reminder that every second carried risk. Through the smoke, Navy corpsmen moved swiftly, identifying victims and applying immediate triage. Trauma blankets were wrapped around trembling survivors, and extraction pods were staged for rapid removal. One by one, women and children emerged from the hold, their faces streaked with fear and exhaustion but alive. 26 were accounted for, each tagged, checked, and reassured by medical personnel who had practiced for this exact scenario. "We're clear. Repeat, civilians secure," came the voice over the comms, and for a moment, a collective exhale swept through the task force. Yet not all containers had been opened. One remained sealed, the lock bolted from the inside, and a shadowed shape moved against the door, a final puzzle yet to reveal itself. Attention snapped back to the command target. Miguel Arriola, the elusive broker, was cornered against a wall of stacked crates. GPS trackers confirmed his location in real time, feeding coordinates to the USS Howard's medical bay team in case of injury. The SEALs moved in, ensuring his arms were secured and his digital devices seized. As he was led away, Arriola leaned close to the arresting officer and whispered, "You stopped nothing. There's another ship." The word struck with the weight of forewarning. Months of meticulous planning, data analysis, and international coordination had intercepted only one node in a sprawling network. The implication was unmistakable. The operation was larger, more resilient, and far from finished. The raid concluded with controlled evacuation. Survivors were stabilized, the traffickers detained, and evidence, electronic, financial, and biometric, was secured for subsequent prosecution. Yet the final sentence of Arriola's confession lingered in every officer's mind, a reminder that while this storm had broken, the currents of criminal enterprise continued to move, dark and deliberate, just beyond the horizon. On the USS Howard, the medical deck became a quiet hub of urgency and care. Naval medical detachments moved through tight corridors, applying stabilization protocols while interpreters whispered reassurances in 7 different languages. Trauma blankets, for lines, and triage kits created a web of life-saving order amid exhaustion and shock. Survivors, some as young as 7, clung to the smallest comforts, gripping hands or staring wide-eyed at the sterile lights above. They spoke 7 languages, but all said the same word: home. One corpsman reflected, recording observations for the UN Human Trafficking Division. The immediate danger had passed, but the emotional toll rippled through every rescuer and survivor alike, a reminder that victory carried its own invisible scars. Even as the medical teams worked, intelligence analysts began sifting through the traffickers' data drives, recovering logs, transaction records, and communication histories. Each file peeled back a layer of the network, revealing routes, offshore accounts, and hidden nodes across 3 continents. The organization was far larger than initially believed, a sprawling system moving billions in illicit profit while exploiting human lives. Meanwhile, at Quantico, Arriola sat under strict custody, debriefed by FBI agents and cybersecurity analysts. His calm demeanor belied the scope of the operation he had helped orchestrate. "You think it ends with me?" he said, his voice low, almost amused. This was worth $15 billion. The confession included code phrases like Horizon Tier 3, linking shipments, financial channels, and even potential offshore contacts. The network was modular, resilient, and prepared for disruption, but thanks to coordinated efforts, a critical node had been dismantled. While investigators cataloged and verified the seized data, operational units recalculated the threat. One thing was undeniable: the operation had saved lives, but it had also illuminated a chilling truth. Somewhere in the vast expanse of ocean, another freighter had already departed. The rescued victims were only a fraction of those endangered, and the syndicate remained capable of moving human cargo with frightening efficiency. The aftermath was measured in small, precise victories: lives recovered, traffickers captured, and evidence secured, and in the quiet weight of what remained out there. Every survivor's relief was tinged with anxiety for those still at risk, and every interrogator knew that Ariola's words marked just the beginning of unraveling a billion-dollar enterprise. The silence that followed the raid was not empty. It was a pause before the next revelation, the calm before pursuing the remaining threads. The debriefing rooms were quiet, sterile, yet heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. Officials from the Department of Justice and Department of Defense compiled reports for internal circulation, documents detailing assets deployed, lives saved, and the tactical efficiency of Neptune Veil. Classified material was redacted before submission to congressional subcommittees, leaving only what could be publicly acknowledged: precision, restraint, and human cost. They'll never see headlines. But they changed the world in silence, one senior officer reflected, noting that operational success often exists in absence, in what the public would never witness. Yet even as praise circulated quietly, a troubling question lingered: how had the traffickers anticipated the surveillance? Every measure of secrecy and counterintelligence had been in place, and still the syndicate adapted. Meanwhile, analysts reviewed victim rehabilitation data and UNHCR recovery statistics. Each survivor was tracked through safe houses, medical follow-ups, and psychological stabilization programs. The numbers showed progress, yet gaps persisted. Some children had been trafficked multiple times, families had been fragmented, and the broader network remained active. In a war without borders, justice moves slower than money, the narrator mused, the weight of that truth settling over the room. Operators and investigators alike recognized that even the most sophisticated interdiction could not erase the ripple effects of decades of organized exploitation. But as night fell over the Gulf, the sea lay quiet, a deceptive calm masking the ongoing currents of criminal enterprise. Neptune Veil left a lasting mark, not in headlines, but in structural shifts within interagency cooperation. The continuing task force, now designated Neptune Shield, maintained constant vigilance over maritime trafficking corridors, coordinating with the International Maritime Security Coalition to track suspicious vessels across oceans. Annual interdictions rose incrementally, disrupting previously untouchable networks and saving dozens more from exploitation. "Every rescue writes a promise we can never break," reflected a lead officer, acknowledging the ongoing responsibility carried by those who operated in shadows and silence. Each operation built upon the last, a network of protection intertwined with law enforcement, military discipline, and humanitarian outreach. Yet the ocean, vast and inscrutable, continued to conceal what it chose, reminding all that the work was never finished. In the final reflection, the human element came to the forefront. Agents reviewed the FBI closing memo #17A and Navy commendation letters, noting individual contributions that ensured the success of Neptune Veil. Amid accolades and after-action reports, one image lingered: an unmarked grave at sea, a solemn symbol of those lost before intervention could reach them. The reminder of mortality underscored every mission. The stakes are never abstract, and every decision carries the weight of life and death. In the stillness after the storm, with survivors safe and perpetrators detained, the world could barely glimpse the magnitude of effort required to protect the innocent. And in that silence, the final truth remained: justice doesn't sleep. It waits, in the silence between orders.